Mr. Baker has moved second reading of Bill 137, an act to prohibit unsolicited phone calls for the purpose of selling, leasing, renting, or advertising prescribed products or services. Pursuant to Standing Order 98, the member has 12 minutes for his presentation.
Thanks very much, Madam Speaker, and it's an honour to be able to speak to this private member's bill. Last year, around this time, I introduced a private member's bill to ban door-to-door sales of certain products to protect consumers from aggressive, coercive, or misleading sales practices at the door. And recently, the government adopted my private member's bill as part of Bill 59, the Consumers First Act. Ultimately, that Act, Bill 59, which we passed this spring, banned unsolicited door-to-door sales. So recently, I've been talking to my constituents about Bill 59 and the ban on unsolicited door-to-door sales. And I've been talking to them when I knock on doors. I've been talking to them at my seniors advisory group meeting. And when I mention that ban on unsolicited door-to-door sales, almost all of my constituents tell me the same thing. Okay, I'm great. That's really good news. That's great work on door-to-door. But can you stop the salespeople from calling my home? Can you stop the phone calls? And so I started talking to constituents about this issue, and I began hearing from constituent after constituent who told me stories about receiving unwanted or harassing phone calls from telemarketers who call them up to 4 to 5 times a day every day, who use aggressive tactics to sell them products that they don't want or don't need. Many are calling to sell air conditioning, window repair services, roof repair, financial services, long-distance plans, and a number of others. But the one that I hear about the most by far, Speaker, is duct cleaning services. I hear from people everywhere in my community that are complaining about getting 4 to 5 calls a day from people trying to sell them duct cleaning services. And I don't know how often we're supposed to get our duct cleans, but I can guarantee it's not 4 to 5 times a day. Many consumers have said that they're on the federal do-not-call list, right? Many consumers are on the federal do-not-call list, so they shouldn't be receiving telemarketing calls at all, but they receive them anyway. And many ask the company to add them to their do-not-call list, which under federal regulations they should be doing, and they don't do that anyway. A lot of these telemarketing companies, particularly the ones selling duct cleaning, they completely ignore the federal do-not-call list. They don't establish their own do-not-call list or don't abide by them. And as a result, I've heard from far too many consumers who are harassed by telemarketers who call them multiple times a day. Every day, they use aggressive sales tactics to sell them services that they don't want or they don't need. And it's disgraceful to me, Speaker, that we have businesses who have a business model that's based on harassing consumers into compliance. It's based on harassing consumers into buying products and, frankly, taking advantage of vulnerable consumers. So this bill is about taking action on this very issue to end this predatory practice. It's about protecting Ontarians from these harassing phone calls. And this bill is taking action to stop the phone calls. So this private member's bill to Stop the Calls Act would ban telemarketing for products and services that have resulted in consumers receiving countless unwanted and harassing phone calls. So if passed, the bill would ban certain products and services from being sold as the result of an unsolicited phone call to a consumer. Okay? So this means that if a company calls a consumer and it's unsolicited, that company did not have permission to call in the first place, in advance from the consumer, then any sale that results from that call, even if it happens subsequent to that phone call, is disallowed. So should the company contravene the ban and sell products or services to a consumer, the first thing that would happen is that the contract or the sale with the consumer would immediately be void. In addition, the consumer would be entitled to be paid back all their money that they've paid under the contract, and the return or replacement of any product that was taken under the contract, if that applies, and stiff penalties would be put in place for offenders who violate the ban. So individual offenders, individuals who are responsible for this sale or for the sale of the product or service or the signing of the contract would be fined up to $2,000 per incident, and the companies responsible would be fined up to $25,000 per incident. And finally, if the consumer does not receive payment, they have the option of taking the company to court and, if successful, receiving double the amount they were owed plus legal fees. So the voiding of the contract, the requirement that to return the consumer money, the stiff fines that we placed upon the company, would make telemarketing of these specific products and services prohibitively expensive. And that's what would stop many of the harassing and unwanted calls that consumers receive, because these telemarketing companies, these businesses who propagate these calls, could no longer make money selling products this way. Now, our goal here, my goal here, is not to go after everybody. It's not to stop the good, honest salespeople. It's not meant to stop the young student who's trying to make money and calls you once a year to clean your windows. It's not meant to stop the young person who's selling newspapers and calls around and asks if they can add you to their delivery route. I'm not talking about those. We're talking about the bad actors who call people multiple times a day, every day, multiple times a week, who are really just trying to harass people into buying their products. And so we're really trying to focus this. And so what I've done in the bill is given the Minister of Government and Consumer Services the authority through regulation to select the products and services that would be banned. Okay? So the Minister could select which products and services this ban on telemarketing sales would apply to. The other thing that I've included in the bill is certain exemptions, Speaker. So certain sales originating by phone would be allowed. These would include calls from businesses who have an existing or a recent relationship with a consumer. The bill would also exempt businesses who have previously received consents from consumers to call them. So if you've called a business and inquired about a product and they call you back and then you ultimately buy that product, that's okay. That's exempted under the bill. If you have an established contract with a company, you have an existing service with a company, and they call you and then upsell you or sell you a different product, that's okay. That's allowed under this bill. If you had a contract recently with a company, or you've dealt with them recently, or recently had a sale of a product, and then they call you again and you buy something, that's allowed under this contract. What we're talking about here is really we're exempting those folks who are doing ongoing reasonable business with consumers. We're also giving exemptions to charities, to nonprofits, to political parties and candidates. They would all be exempted. This is focused on those for-profit telemarketers, again, who are harassing consumers, calling them repetitively, nonstop. Now, one of the questions I get from a lot of people is, well, isn't this federal jurisdiction? And so the regulation of telecommunications and telemarketing falls under federal jurisdiction. That is true. So it's not under the province's jurisdiction to say who can and cannot call a consumer. But the province is allowed to outline conditions under which a contract or a sale can be agreed to or can be completed. So the Stop the Calls Act doesn't ban phone calls from coming in. We can't do that here at the provincial legislature, or the Government of Ontario can't do that. The Stop the Calls Act bans sales or contracts resulting from an unsolicited call. That's how the bill works. Now, Speaker, I have been told by a lot of consumers, by a lot of constituents, that, a lot of the unwanted or harassing phone calls that they receive come from beyond Canadian borders. So this bill would actually protect them against those calls as well. No matter where telemarketers are based, they are striving to sell you a product or service on behalf of a company here in Canada. So if you think about it, the duct cleaning company, the company that wants to repair your windows or repair your roof, or the long-distance company, these are all Canadian-based companies who've hired telemarketing companies to sell their products, right? So my bill would void the contract with the Canadian company and require that they return the consumer's money and pay a fine. So this, again, would make it prohibitively expensive for the company here in Canada to hire telemarketers to sell their products, and that's what would stop the calls. Now, not only will the Stop the Calls Act be a deterrent to businesses that are using these harassing techniques, it would also give consumers a lot more confidence in dealing with illegitimate scammers. So take, for example, the "Can you hear me" scam. I'm sure some of us in this legislature have heard about this or have been targeted by this. So scammers would call a consumer asking, "Can you hear me? Can you hear me?" at the start of the conversation. And upon responding yes, a consumer's voice is then often recorded and edited to sound as though the consumer has agreed to purchase a product or service. So while the consumer would not be liable to fulfill any such duty, this is often used as an intimidation factor to scare consumers into fulfilling false contract obligations. So the Stop the Calls Act actually gives consumers the peace of mind knowing that they can't be forced into a contract regardless of what they say on the phone, because it came as the result of an unsolicited phone call. The Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre, which is a federal government agency, also warns consumers about a number of different scams. The timeshare scam, for example, that lures potential customers with free stays at timeshare in exchange for the client agreeing to simply sit through a timeshare presentation. However, so problems can arise once you agree to buy the property. That's right, a free lunch, as the member for Eglinton Lawrence says. Timeshare scams range from hidden booking or maintenance fees to more extreme cases, such as companies suddenly going out of business once they secure your hefty deposit, leaving you without a timeshare. So the Stop the Calls Act will give consumers the right to get out of those misleading agreements where they've signed a contract. This won't stop all scams. This bill can't stop all scams. But it will stop those scams where a consumer has signed a contract with a Canadian-based company. Now, I'm sure you're also familiar with vacation-based scams as well. So here the victim receives a cold call, here's your automated, hey, they say, hey, you've won a vacation. You know, we've all received these phone calls. So, or they're told that there's a preferred customer, they've been awarded a credit or discount on a destination vacation if they book right away. And once the potential victim proceeds with the call, they'll be asked to provide personal information, like a credit card and that sort of thing to book a vacation, and to make a deposit to guarantee the trip, that sort of thing. Again, the Stop the Calls Act gives consumers the protection of being able to leave these deals, regardless of what they say or agree to over the phone, because the sale came as the result of an unsolicited call, Speaker. So not only would this bill help protect consumers against those harassing phone calls 4 to 5 times a day, every day, or once a day, every day, multiple times a week, certainly it would stop those calls. But it would also help in some selective cases with some of those scams where sales are completed, where consumers are defrauded or convinced into signing a fraudulent agreement. Speaker, I've heard from too many consumers, too many in my community of Etobicoke Centre, who are harassed by telemarketers who call them multiple times a day, every day, and use aggressive tactics to sell them services or products they don't need or want. And to me, it's absolutely disgraceful that some organizations have a business model that is based on harassing consumers into buying their products. I think we need to take action to protect Ontario consumers from this, and my bill would do just that. It's time to stop the calls. Thank you, Speaker.